Hi, welcome to T2W Garage. Today I'm going to show you how I replaced the front wheel bearings on this 2008 Toyota FJ Cruiser. So let's get started. Break it loose. So now that we have the wheel off, the next step is going to be to remove the brake caliper. The brake caliper is this big unit here on the back, and that houses your brake pads that squeezes against the rotor, and that's how you stop. So before we remove this, and this is removed by two 17mm bolts that go on the back side and attach this to the hub itself. Before we do that, there's a 12mm bolt right here that's going to remove this strain relief. And we want to remove that first so that this hose can flex with it as we pull it off. So now that that bracket is loose there, we can go ahead and remove the two bolts on the back side. There's one right here and then one down below. So now that I've got the two bolts out of the back, they look like this. Setting those aside, it's important to not let this hang by the brake line because you might put some undue stress on that brake line. So I'm going to use a rubber tarp strap to suspend it. First I need to, and the caliper will be a little tight on the brakes. So I usually like to just run a strap through and then I'll hang it from up here on the spring. Okay, so now the next step is going to be to remove your brake rotor, which is this big disc here. Now these can really be seized on and I might have to really work with this. It does not hurt to take like a rubber or dead blow mallet and just beat on this a little bit to break that mechanical bond, because if it's been on here a while it will be really tight around here, but that will come right off. There's no other bolts or nuts or anything. It has to be broken loose. Sometimes a steel hammer is needed. Just don't beat and dent your actual disc up here. That's going to be used for braking. But on this center part around here, you can tap that with a hammer. You're just trying to break that mechanical bond. There we go. So now, we finally broke that loose. So this will just slide right off like so. And we'll set that aside in the hot sun so it'll be nice and hot when we handle it to put it back. So now, the next step is this center cap right here. This is just a dust cover. So you want to be able to get that off because there is a 35mm nut inside here that has to come off, and that's what attaches the hub to the axle. These caps are on here very tight, very snug. They are just a dry fit. It helps a lot if you have a chisel or something with a sharp point to get between right here where that hub goes up, or this cap goes right up against the wheel hub. Like a flat blade screwdriver, if it's got a blunt edge, you'll just beat on it and it won't start. But you'll notice with the sharp point, it already has started to separate just with a couple of taps. So work your way around it and just work it off slowly. There we go. So it's popped loose and this just comes off just like that. Set that aside. Now inside here you'll notice you got your axle shaft. You have a cotter key that's holding on a castle nut cover. Now this is not a true castle nut like you might find on other vehicles, but this blue section here is a locking cap that goes over the actual nut. But regardless, it works the same way. It's just in two pieces as opposed to one. The bending up the cotter key here. I've heard people call these split keys, whatever. I grew up calling them cotter keys. Side, and it comes out looking just like that. And the next step is going to be just to remove this little, this is the locking cap I was telling you about, this blue locking cap. Using a 35mm impact socket will fit this nut. Alright, so again, back with my air wrench, I'm going to put on here and just remove that gently and remove that 35mm nut. It may be difficult to see, but there's four, yeah, here we go. There's 4 bolts on the back. These are 17 millimeter, and that is to pull this whole wheel bearing assembly off. So if you remove these 4, there's 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, but it is a pain to get in there. You cannot get a socket, an impact wrench, because that would make it just too simple. So what we're going to have to do is to take a 17 millimeter end wrench, and you're going to have to get back in here like this and just work these off. So it can be a bit of a challenge. What I like to do is put a wrench on it, and you can hardly get a box end wrench, but you can a little bit. If you turn the front hub here where you're between lug studs, it does thin out and allows you to get a box end wrench on there to where you can break it loose. Now I've got some crud and stuff built up on these, but I'm going to put that on there and then use my dead blow mallet to just break that loose. And there, that's all it took for that one. Same thing over here. Got to rotate it to where you're in between the studs so that you can, and the reason that helps is because it's thicker where the studs are and it's thinner in between to allow you to get back in there. So there, that broke loose, and I'm going to do the same thing all the way around. Another little tool tip, if you happen to have these box-in ratcheting wrenches, that will help. If you can get it in there. Mine are pretty thick. Mine are these are cobalt, and so they're kind of thick, but you can get them in there, and that will help save you a little bit of time. Otherwise, you got to use an end wrench and pull it off. Now, you can only do it so far, because then you can't get your wrench out. So if you watch it, the bolt backs out. But if you're lucky, you can break these loose, and then you can turn them by hand. They won't be completely tight all the way out. Well, I got myself in a pinch there because I tried to back that out too far. Now I can't get the wrench off like I was telling you earlier. But no worries, if you do that, go ahead and back these other bolts out some so that you can at least get that bearing assembly, that hub, off of there. Pull it out a little bit. So this hub assembly won't just pop off of here when you break those bolts loose, because this axle has splines on it, and this is seated up on those splines. So we need to get that off of there. Now, ideally, you'll have one of these gadgets that allows you, it's a pulley puller or a hub puller, whatever you want to call it. But you have to be able to hook to this and work this off this spline. So you'll notice in the center of the axle here, there's a divot, and that's what this point sits in. So it's as if you've never used one of these before. And then you adjust it, and you get this set on the back of this, and then we're just gonna snug that up by hand. Now you can put a wrench on here and turn it, or you can use an air wrench. And guess which one I'm going to use? There. So we just put this on here and tighten it, and it will work that off. You'll see this hub start to pull forward. See if you watch right here very closely. See how to pull it right off? Now you don't want to pull it all the way off yet, because you don't have these bolts out of the back of here. We just have them loosened up. So now we're going to continue to work with these until we can get those all the way off. And like before, we need to break that mechanical bond, because on the back here it's probably stuck from all the years, so we can just tap. All right, so now this broke loose, you can just pull this straight off of here, and as you can see, that is the entire front wheel bearing assembly. Now note yourself, there is a little O-ring right here that we want to be very careful with. Sometimes it gets stuck on the inside of here. We're going to clean this out good, and then we'll re-lube this O-ring and use it again, unless you have a new one. But my wheel bearings did not come with a new one. What I'm doing here now is I'm taking the old O-ring that was on that the old seal. And yes, ideally, any of you mechanics out there are going to say, well, you should replace the O-ring, and yes, I'm aware of that, but I did not order an O-ring for it, not realizing I need to do that. So I'm wiping it down, cleaning the crud off of it. What I'm going to do is I'm taking some clean motor oil, and I'm just going to get a little bit on my fingers here and wipe it down So at least it's going to have something to help lubricate the old O-ring and help improve its elasticity and its ability to seal. So I'm going to lay that right there, get the oil off my hands, open up my new, shiny, brand new wheel bearing assembly here. Voila. There is a protective ring on these. As you can see, they come with these, have the bolts that go in or already have red Loctite on them, new studs, whole new assembly. This is a lot easier than when you have to break this all apart and replace the seals and press new bearings into it. Trust me, it's just not worth it. So just take that protective cover off and check here, and then I'm going to place the O-ring up on this section here, and it's oiled up and still in pretty good shape. So I'm going to press that down here, and then we're going to put this back on. But first, don't forget to put your brake dust cover back on. Don't ask me how I know that. It's a pain to put these bolts in here, but you can put it on there. There's a couple of indexes that help line it up, or it's just as easy to go ahead and press it, set it on your wheel bearing assembly, and then get it in there. So want to be careful and just line up the splines on the axle, and then you can work to get the bolt holes lined up in the back to start tightening those up. And it helps if you lift up on this assembly, it'll help you freely spin these bolts in place. Now this dust shield is a pain because it makes it hard to see, to get your bolt holes lined up. So you just got to look in here. It's impossible to get a good camera angle on this. So just take my word for it. You'll feel your way around and get those lined up. I like to start with the top and just get a couple of threads started so that the wheel bearing is not going to sag down too much. And then screw it as far as you can by hand, because when you start using the wrenches, you can only get a little bit of a turn at a time. All right, so at this point, now you can just take your 17mm wrench, and you're not going to be in a big hurry, and just slowly start working all 4 of these bolts in until you get them snugged up. Out and just show like a few turns on each bolt just to. So I've got the bolts mostly tightened, and one handy tip is to go ahead and put your nut back on the axle, and what that'll do is it'll help pull that in a little bit to help it seat a little better. Well, now we have this the hub bolted up. So now these 4 17mm bolts are attached and they're firm, they're torqued down. So now with all of our parts that came off of this, we're going to reapply the locking cap back to the nut, and then you want to find a position to where the holes will line up as best you can with the hole that's drilled into the axle here. And then we'll reinsert the cotter key like it was before when we took the cap off, and the backside is bent over as well. Now for my next trick, this little cap can be a real pain in the tuchus to get onto the hub because it's such a tight fit. You want to make sure you start it evenly all the way around. It looks like it would be a simple thing to install, but it's can be a little challenging. So I'm going to get it in here. I get one side just barely started, and I'm taking my dead blow mallet and just tapping around the outside. So the trick is you want to get it started evenly all the way around, and then you can drive it on in. So let's rotate it around and make sure this side still needs to be tapped in a little bit. It will pop right like that. It'll pop back out on you. See, what happened is one side seated too far and the other side didn't. So I'm going to take it back out and do it again. It can take quite a few tries to get this started. And if any of you all have a better trick for putting these things in, please leave a comment below because I would love to hear it. So the next step is to put our brake rotor back on, like so. And then our brake caliper with the 2 17mm bolts in the back. Then don't forget to reattach the support, and then you can put your wheel back on. So let's go ahead and go through those steps. So I hope this video was helpful in showing you how to replace the front wheel bearing assemblies on a Toyota FJ Cruiser. Most vehicles are going to be very similar to this process. This happens to be a four-wheel drive vehicle, so you have the drive shaft to deal with, and on a two-wheel drive vehicle or a rear-wheel drive vehicle, you wouldn't have that in the front. Now, I won't sugarcoat it. It's quite a bit of work to do this job, especially if it's an older vehicle like this one who's 10 years old. Those assemblies and some of the parts were really kind of crusted on there. But you have a choice. You can either do the work yourself and save a lot of money, or not. You can take it to a dealer or to a mechanic to do the work for you. Now, I highly recommend that if you're not comfortable with doing this type of work, please seek out a qualified mechanic. But if you're comfortable with doing this kind of work and you do it yourself, you can save yourself a lot of money. So, this is Tim Two Wheels, and as always, thank you so much for watching.